In this video, we're going to solve literal equations. Literal equations are equations that have multiple variables in them. As a reminder, let's remember these things. We're going to identify which variable is being solved for. We're going to identify what is in the way of the variable being isolated, and then we're going to make a plan of attack. The third thing is we're going to complete all the operations, simplifying where possible until the variable is isolated. So let's take a look at our first couple of examples. The problem on the left is not a literal equation. There is just a y in this problem. The problem on the right is a literal equation. There are multiple variables, x and y. So on the first one, if we were just solving this, we would solve it. We would subtract 4 from both sides. We would end up with 3y equals 5. And then dividing by 3, we would say that y is equal to 5/3. We're going to take a similar plan of attack on this literal equation. We're solving this now for y, so it's going to tell you which one it's going to solve for. And what's in the way of it? Well, if we look here, we have the 4x and we have the 3. I would attack the 4x in a very similar way to what we did on the previous problem. And now when we simplify this down, this becomes 0. So we have 3y on the left side. We have 9 minus 4x. We cannot put those together, but we have to show that it occurs. Then we divide by 3. And we end up with our final answer being y equals, and we can leave this as one whole fraction, 9 minus 4x all over 3. We have taken this literal equation, we have simplified it down, we have solved it for y. It is still an equivalent equation to what we started with in terms of the relationship between x and y. The next one we're going to deal with is a problem where it's a equals L times w. We're going to solve it for L, so things that are in the way. This w, we have to deal with it somehow. So it's being multiplied by L, so if we divide it by L, and I use a cursive L here so it does not look like a 1, L divided by L is 1. So I now have w on the right side, and I have a divided by L on the left side. That would be if I was solving it for w. If I'm solving it for L, I would want to divide both sides by w because w divided by w is 1. And I'd have a divided by w is L. So we could solve either of these equations for either variable. The variables are still related in a way where they're equivalent. So all three of these are equivalent. This one's solved for w, this one's solved for L, and this one's solved for a. So we have it in all the different forms. All right, the next example, we're going to solve this one for w. So solving it for w, things that are in the way. We have this 2L, we have this 2. We have different plans of attack, but I think it's probably best to subtract the 2L and do it to both sides. So on the left side, we have p minus 2L. On the right side, this operation did get a 0, that's good. So 0 plus 2w. And then our last step is going to be to divide by 2. So p minus 2L divided by 2 is equal to w. All right, our last one of these types, we're solving it for b. So we have a equals 1/2 times b times h. I like to do that or use parentheses to show that that's being multiplied. So things that we have to deal with. We have to deal with this h and this 1/2. When I look at this, I see it being multiplied, so I'm thinking division. It's one term. I think I'm going to have to divide by h because h divided by h is going to be 1. And then I also have to think about, I'm going to divide it by 1/2 as well because 1/2 divided by 1/2 is also 1. So if I have 1/2 times h on the bottom, this division, this piece becomes 1, this piece becomes 1. I'm left with b equals, and I have a over 1/2 h. There's a second route to do this. If I wanted to do that same problem. And it's to deal with the 1/2, I would multiply it by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal of this is 2 over 1. So that when I multiply these out, this piece becomes 1. And so if I multiply this one by 2 as well, I have 2 times a. This piece multiplied out becomes 1. And I have b times h. And now I have to divide by h. And when I finish this, I end up with 2a divided by h equals b. And these are equivalent expressions. So a divided by 1/2 times h and 2a over h are both equivalent to b. All right, the next one, we're going to solve this slope formula. It's important to consider that these tops and bottoms are basically in parentheses. You have to do the subtraction on the top and then divide it by whatever you get when you do the subtraction on the bottom. So you're solving it for y sub 2. We really have to deal with this whole bottom first before we can really do anything else. So it's divided by x minus 2, or sorry, x sub 2 minus x sub 1. So we're going to multiply it by that, so that these top and bottom, when we multiply that fraction, they simplify to 1. If I do that to one side, I have to do it to the other. So now on the left side, I have x sub 2 minus x sub 1 times m. My final step would be to add y sub 1 to both sides. So I have this entire piece, this x sub 2 minus x sub 1, all multiplied by m, and then I'm just adding y sub 1 to it, and that is what y sub 2 is equal to. So x sub 1, x sub 2, and y sub 1, y sub 2 are all different variables. It could be like x, y, z, a. They're all representing different values.